We talk to athletes all the time about something we call three levers, which is that when you're exercising, you need fluid, you need electrolytes, and you need carbs. And I'm sure that's a similar approach to what you take to a marathon. What do you aim to try to consume during a marathon, and how does that vary in different conditions?
Yeah, so the conditions are the key word there. Obviously our ideal marathon conditions are about 10 or 12 degrees. Your fluid loss is minimized in that time in those conditions. And our carb consumption, I've always used a drink mix rather than gels, and we would target 80 to 90 grams of carb per hour. So that's not something to jump into straight away. That's something to build and trial and error, and train your guts essentially to consume that much. I guess that's our starting point in terms of carb intake during the marathon, and then we need to look at what's your fluid loss over per hour, per 2 hours. What are you expecting to lose? And obviously it's a balance. You can't replace as much as you lose. Your guts can't take that. And as you get lighter, you get a little bit more efficient, but there's always a tipping point, more so with hydration. We had to essentially look at what fluid loss rates were like. So that's just, measuring weight post run, fluids you take on, and keeping a really an accurate record of that, so you get a bit of a baseline, and then working back. So building in how much fluid. With the sweat testing, we can look at how sodium loss and electrolyte loss, and how much we want to replace during the event. Everyone's very different. Some of my marathon teammates pre-Doha, our sweat rates were liters different over 2 hours, and again sodium sweat rate losses were very different. So it's the personalized approach you guys take is fantastic, because you can't put two athletes in the same on the same fueling plan without that knowledge behind it.
It's good. It's a good point, because we preach to athletes a lot that the carbohydrate consumption levels tend to be, once you figured out the event, the duration, the intensity, the carb consumption levels are reasonably static. I totally agree with you about the gut training. I think 80 or so grams an hour is definitely a relatively high amount of carbs to take an hour, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that works if you can tolerate it, but you need to build up to it. But with the fluid, it is all over the map, not only because of the individual differences in fluid and salt loss, but also the environmental differences. Everyone's anticipating that Tokyo is going to be on the hotter side. I don't think it's clear yet exactly, obviously, what the temperature could be, but we're expecting high heat and high humidity. So what's your gut feel at the moment about how much fluid you might take during the marathon, assuming you're going to be out there somewhere between, I'm getting somewhere between 2 hours 10, 2 hours 15 minutes, something like that?
So my hydration and nutrition plan isn't quite finalized yet, but in hot conditions, and it will vary, especially with humidity. I'll lose up to 5 liters in 2 hours. Wow. So 2.5 liters an hour, which is a lot. And the balance of how much you actually try and replace is and what you can handle is a real trial and error scenario to see how much you can take on. Cyclists versus running, there's a lot more gut bouncing up and down, running. So even between sports, it's very different. We'll be doing some more testing. I'm actually in Spain at the moment for a heat camp. We'll be going through our hydration plan and trying to tweak that as much as we can, but also replicating the Tokyo or Sapporo where the marathon will be. Replicating those conditions in Europe is quite hard. Even in the summer, you can go to really hot locations, but combining that humidity is quite hard to get a really good similar conditions. So we'll probably still be tweaking our plan in the 2 weeks in our pre-camp once we get there and we really get in those conditions. So yeah, it's definitely a moving target, but we're continually developing it.
Yeah, with that specific number, 2.5 litres an hour, we've definitely worked with athletes and come across athletes of similar sweat rates. But you're right, that is pushing towards the higher end. Very occasionally, we see, for instance, NBA basketball players or NFL players that are considerably bigger humans who have higher sweat rates. But in a marathon runner, that's quite up there. One of our general recommendations, and we don't make a lot of general recommendations, but one is that it's really hard for most people to drink more than 1 litre an hour, and often shouldn't be attempted. What do you find? From practical experience, what do you reckon a ceiling that because in a marathon you'll be running at close to 5 minutes a mile, won't you, for the duration? So for most people that is faster than they can run. It is flat out running. How much fluid with practice do you think you can get in, and sort of how do you proportion that out? Is that in little 200 milliliter bits, or do you try and get as much down in one go? What's the strategy?
So normally in a marathon, we have drink stations available to us every 5 kilometers.
Yeah.
So that's 15 minutes. In Doha, we had, I think it was closer to about 3.5k. So we had more fluid stations, but it was on a loop. I think it was a 7-kilometer loop. So we got drinks twice. I still haven't heard what the aid stations are going to be like in Sapporo for the Olympics, but we'll work around that. So yeah, normally about every 15 minutes we get access to drinks. I think that upper limit of about 1 litre an hour is what I've tried to target previously. So it was a little over 2 litres, I think, from memory was what we were targeting in Doha. So yeah, but when you're uncomfortable, you're tired, you may be struggling to take on fluid, and your guts are feeling full, it can be quite difficult to take more on. So you definitely need to practice as much as you can in the conditions and with that fueling plan, and obviously you just tweak it as you need and as you see fit.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It tells a lot of what we've heard talking to other athletes in a similar position. Moving on from that, we mentioned the fact that your race time is just over 2 hours. You're running at close to 5 minutes a mile. We talk a lot in the team here, because a lot of us are keen endurance athletes, about pacing. In fact, there's a good amount of Mickey taking between members of the team about various levels of ability to pace. I was pretty awful at pacing when I was a young athlete, I think, like a lot of young athletes are, but then actually felt like as I got further into my career, learning to pace well was a real advantage. And I kind of almost use it these days. If I race in a longer race now, I almost see it as one of the huge advantages I've got over youngsters, actually, is the ability to sort of sit back and wait and expend the energy when you need to. Marathon running, and especially championship marathons, are always going to be a bit different, because people are racing. They're not necessarily, you don't know that people are going to be going for a world record time at the front or whatever. But can you give us a bit of insight into how your pacing strategy plays out? Is it based around even pacing, negative split, or how do you go about that?
So I have a history of negative splitting all of my marathons. I think that's probably, I've gone into them slightly more conservative than others might, but a number of them I've had a very specific goal. So my second marathon, I debuted in Berlin in 2018, and then early in 2019 I needed to hit the Doha qualifying standard, and so I needed to run under 2:16. So that was my goal. I think I ran 2:13.50 in that marathon, and we ran about a 90-second negative split. I made sure I got to 30k with my goal. I wasn't going to roll the dice and try chase another 2 minutes. All I needed to do was secure that qualifying time. And then in Doha again, I went into the race relatively conservatively. We knew the heat. We had seen the women's marathon, and they actually had quite a lot worse conditions than the men. And we saw how that affected the women, and there was, you know, a lot of DNFs, and a lot of people really struggled. So I went into that one relatively conservatively, and I think I still ran a minute faster in the second half. And then my fourth marathon was in Seville, and the goal was to hit the Olympic time. So, you know, we went through, you know, up to 30K on 2:11-ish pace, which was 30 seconds under the limit. And then, you know, once I was safely to 30K, I kind of gave myself a license to go and enjoy it, and came home, you know, a bit quicker, and took another 50 seconds off my time. So yeah, I mean, personally, negative splitting is the safest way to go and the most enjoyable.
Yeah.
I think statistically, running a marginal positive split, people will say, is the best way to get the ultimate fastest time. You know, that's the way world records have been run, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think you need to have realistic goals, and yeah, make sure that they're on track before you get carried away, and you know, start making moves and surges and things like that. But in the marathon, being patient is key. It's a very long race, and you know, everyone says the race doesn't start till 20 miles. So yeah, I think you need to be patient, and stick to your goals, and make sure that they're playing out before you can give yourself a license to go and, you know, get really aggressive or make moves and things like that. It's a long way, and it's a long way to go if things go bad as well.